Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the June DTN stocks report. My name is Andy Miller with DTN. I'll be your moderator today, and with me, as always, is Todd Hultman, lead market analyst for DTN. During this event, just a couple housekeeping items. Everyone will be in listen-only mode. If you do want to ask any questions, we ask that you go to the Q&A section in the bottom right of the screen. Go ahead and click on that and type in your question, and we will address questions at the end of the session. And also want to mention that this event is being recorded, and we'll have a rebroadcast link up on the DTN website in our events section within the next 48 business hours. So those are the basics. Todd, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, everybody. Welcome to our webinar here today for USDA's Acreage and June 1 grain stocks report. This tends to be a key market mover in many years, but as we'll soon find out, didn't have quite the fireworks that previous reports have had on June 30th here in the past. I want to also note that we are completing the first half of the calendar year today, and that sometimes is a significant event and adds to some volatility in trading, just trading at the end of the quarter. Well, there's been a lot of anticipation this year. Overall, the planting conditions were considered very favorable throughout most of the Corn Belt. There were some wet areas in the eastern Corn Belt, but none as wet probably as eastern North Dakota and northwest Minnesota. And so that's where much of the question came for today's report on the planting acreage side. And so let's just hop right in and see what USDA said today. For 2022, we are going to have another year where corn remains king. I thought in the preview that soybeans had a good chance of overtaking corn acres this year, but that is not to be the case. The corn planted area is 89.92 million acres, says USDA. Soybeans coming in slightly below that at 88.3 million acres. Wheat still the distant third place of the three crops, 47.1 million acres. The two crop total for corn and soybeans this year right now is estimated at 178.2 million acres. That's down roughly 2.4 million from last year's record high. So I think that suggests that there probably will be some prevented acres in that northern plains area that I mentioned, most notably eastern North Dakota and the surrounding area there from excess rain conditions. Just before I move on from this chart, I just kind of like to always point out the historical trend of acres and what a divergence it's been for corn and soybeans versus wheat. We continue to see a steady and maybe choppy, but overall steady, continuous decline in wheat acres through the years, while corn and soybeans have tended to track together. But as we say, corn has been on top since 1983 and is still the king again this year. All right, let's take a look a little closer. Here is the map of states. This is the total planting area is the first map I want to show you. This is corn acres this year, 2022. We see Iowa is the undisputed king of corn acres, 12.7 million. Illinois is number 2. Nebraska is number 3 at 9.7 million. And then Minnesota, 8.3. So they did get quite a few acres planted in Minnesota in spite of the heavy rain situation that they had early in the season. The overall U.S. corn total is the smallest in 3 years, so it is down a bit. It's not much different, to be honest, though, than the 89.5 million acres that USDA has been using in the WASDE report. So as far as expectations for how much production we'll have this year, today's report does not really change the production outlook. We're still looking for about a 14.5 billion bushel crop, and that will bring us to the next question of whether and what the yield will do. So we're going to need more time ahead to determine that. The next map I want to show you is a map of changes from a year ago. And there we see the standout reduction coming from North Dakota, where the planting problems were this year, down 1.1 million acres from what plantings were a year ago. Outside of North Dakota, really the rest of the changes were quite small. Even though Texas looks dark green on this chart, it's still a small change of 150,000 acre increase. So it's maybe not as big of an increase as it looks by color. It's still small there. Overall, throughout the Corn Belt, we see slight reductions in most of the Corn Belt states: Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, Indiana, Kansas, Minnesota, and also surrounding states as well. So here we have the lowest total for 3 years in corn. For soybeans, this is the total acreage estimates from USDA for today's soybean map. 88.3 million acre total. That's the most in 4 years. It's not the 91 million acre total that was estimated in March. That we did not see the new record high that was anticipated much earlier this year. This is the highest total in 4 years overall for soybeans, but again, not the record high that was expected earlier. Again, no surprise, Illinois is the king of soybean acres at 11.2. Iowa's a close number 2. And then we have Minnesota and several states in the 5 to 6 million acre range, million acre range. The next map, like corn, I'll show you now the changes from a year ago. And again, North Dakota stands out, losing 1.35 million acres of soybeans from where they were last year. In Minnesota, not much of a loss, just 150,000 acres planted there. The king of the increase, Illinois, 600,000 increase. And you can see what we saw were slight reductions in corn acres in a lot of the Corn Belt states. We see here slight increases in the soybean acres throughout the Midwest. So interesting, but not big changes outside of North Dakota, really. Wheat planting estimates by category. For all wheat, the estimate came in at 47.1 million acres. That is just slightly higher than what it was a year ago, 46.7. Of course, we're in the midst of winter wheat harvest right now. We're getting close to the halfway mark. Winter wheat acres are expected at 34 million, slightly higher than a year ago. The attention of the day, I think, was on the other spring wheat category. If that came in below 11 million acres, that would have been the lowest spring wheat area since 1972, but it did not. It did not break that record. Other spring wheat came in at 11.1 million acres. That's down a few 100,000 from last year. Durum had a slightly larger increase than expected, 1.9 million acres of durum planted versus 1.64 a year ago. If you follow durum, you know that supplies have been extremely tight all through winter, and so it's maybe not too much of a surprise that more producers thought they'd give durum a try this year. Spring wheat planted totals. Here are the top 6 states that USDA follows for its spring wheat production. And the king, as usual, North Dakota with 5.4 million acres. Let's see, that's just slightly under half of the total, which is usually they're right about 50% of national production on spring wheat. So they'll be there close to that level again this year. Obviously, they did not lose a lot, or we'll see that in just a second. Montana, we have a concern this year of drought conditions in Montana. They have the lowest crop ratings going at the moment. They're the second largest producer, 2.75 million acre planting, and then we have the rest following. Overall, this is the lowest spring wheat acre planting or spring wheat planting area that we've seen in 4 years. Here's the changes from a year ago. Now, I have to apologize. The map looks like we have big, bold changes if you go by the colors, but actually all of those numbers are quite small. In North Dakota, where the biggest planting concern was, would they get the spring wheat in with all the rain that they had? They lost roughly 100,000 acres, so it was not a huge production loss there. Of course, we'll have to see how the rest of the year goes as far as the quality of how that planting went in and what kind of weather they get after the planting. But overall changes to the states for spring wheat planting were actually very minor, considering the amount of attention that they got earlier this year. Just this is kind of a footnote of all the other also-rans, and of course the biggest crop after corn, soybeans, and wheat is cotton. Cotton acres totaled 12.5 million in USDA's estimate today. That's up 1.26 million acres from a year ago and was slightly higher than expected. So that's the most notable other crop outside of the big three. And then looking at the smaller crops, we see barley planting up 386,000 acres, sunflowers close to that, up 379,000. Canola actually down almost 200,000 acres this year, and oats were down 158, but sugar beets were up, lentils were down, rye was up a little, chickpeas were down. So again, not big changes that we're seeing here outside of the increase of 1.25 million acres of cotton. Okay, that does it for the planning estimates. If I didn't say it earlier, today's report is powerful in market terms, but the one thing about it is there's not a whole lot of numbers. It's not like the May WASDE report where we just get buried in new numbers. So now we'll move on to the grain stocks portion here, see what USDA said as far as crop supplies on hand for June 1st. Looking at corn, USDA came in with a finding of 4.35 billion bushels of corn on hand for June 1st. That's up a little bit, roughly 235 million bushels from a year ago. It's still the lowest, second lowest June 1 corn stocks total that we've seen in the past 8 years. And since we know the corn stocks total, we can also do the math and figure out that demand for corn through the first 3 quarters of the season is just above 12 billion bushels. That's a new record high for the first 3 quarters of corn demand. So corn demand doing quite well, obviously benefiting from the lack of competition from Ukraine this year, a concern about supplies, missing Ukraine's production, but as we speak, Brazil is in the midst of its harvest and is expected to have a record production this year. So there will be some competition ahead for corn. Soybean stocks. USDA discovered 971 million bushels of soybean supplies on hand as of June 1st. That's up about 202 million bushels from a year ago. It was close to expectations. It's slightly above. The market was looking for 959 million bushels, and to be honest, I thought it was going to be less than that because we've seen such strong premiums in the July contract over August, and even today, July soybeans are trading over $1 above the price of August soybeans. There were no deliveries last night for soybeans, meal, or bean oil. All the demand indicators continue to look very bullish, very strong, and yet there was no surprise to report in the actual soybean supplies that USDA found in their quarterly grain stocks report today. So like corn, we can figure the demand through the first 3 quarters of the season, and that demand total came to 3.74 billion bushels. That's a new record high for soybeans, and I think that's probably not a surprise given that we've had drought in South America and we have rapid expansion of the renewable diesel industry causing a big increase in soybean oil demand. So all those things have boosted soybean demand here in the U.S. For wheat, today's June 1st finding of wheat stocks were actually the ending stocks for the 2021 to 22 season. USDA found 660 million bushels of wheat on hand June 1st. That was just 5 million bushels above expectations, both from the pre-report estimates and also from USDA's own WASDE report a month ago. Everybody was looking for 655. Well, they came in slightly higher. As you compare this year's ending wheat stocks versus prior years, you see that it's the lowest in 8 years. So it's still a bullish situation for U.S. wheat supplies. But the one probably disappointment was to see such lackluster demand throughout the season. Demand totaled just under 1.93 billion bushels in the season that just ended on May 31st. That was the lowest demand total in 12 years. Well, hard to believe. That's all the numbers we have to talk about today. In conclusion, I would say the report overall, meaning the acreage and the stocks report, were neutral for corn, even though the numbers were slightly higher than expected for both the acreage and the corn stocks. They weren't far off the mark of expectations. Corn is currently trading down 26% or 26 cents, but keep in mind it was down about 16 cents already before the report. We have a lot of things going on pulling corn lower here on Thursday, and one of them was we're seeing a big drop in crude oil and energy prices influencing corn lower. We also have a little bit of rain in the forecast, in roughly the 6 to 10 day period that I think appears to be weighing on prices. For soybeans, today's report I would say was slightly bullish. The surprise of the day, if there was one, was that U.S. soybean acres came in less than expected, 88.3 million bushels, where many of us were expecting above 90 million, or not bushels, 88.3 million acres. Many of us were expecting a planting of over 90 million acres and possibly a new record high in soybean plantings, but that did not happen. Soybean stocks were slightly more than expected, but again, it was so close that I think we could call the stocks number neutral on the day. So I give it a slightly bullish rating due to the lower acres. For wheat, I would say the report overall was neutral. The U.S. wheat planting acres were not a big surprise, and the ending stocks were just a tiny amount higher than expectations. But again, no big surprises for wheat. Currently on the board, November soybeans are trading down 2 cents. They're holding up better than corn, partly helped by today's report, because before the report, soybeans were down 20 cents. So you can see that they've shaken off quite a bit of that loss. And then Kansas City wheat is currently down 28 cents. Minneapolis wheat in September is down 26 cents. So corn and the wheats are getting hit here on Thursday, and I think it has more to do with weather influence and rain in the forecast. Andy? It didn't take very long to go through the numbers. They are important numbers. They tell us a lot about the season ahead, but that's all I've got today, unless you have some good questions.
No, you were fast today. We do have one question, and actually it's not about Canada, which is, I know what you usually get. So I'll read this question. What is your feeling on yield potential for both corn and beans, given the high price of inputs? A lot of farmers have said they've used less fertilizer because of those costs.
Yes, that's a great question, and of course it's the million-dollar question now that we have the planning estimates in. And I will say that I still think that there's a good chance we're going to have less than trendline yields this year. And I largely say that partly because of the fertilizer issue you raise and the temptation to use less, maybe not everywhere, but in some areas. But the big concern I have is that here at DTN, ever since this winter, when I was touring with John Baranek and talking about grain markets, he's been talking about a hot and dry forecast for the summer that we have here, and the three very experienced meteorologists we have behind this, and that forecast has not wavered since John was talking about that in December. So even though we've gotten a little break from the hot temperatures lately, and there is a little bit of rain in the 6 to 10 day forecast, DTN's forecast overall is still for a hot and dry expectation for the month of July, August, and September. And so if that proves out, to me, that's going to be the real key of the summer, and holds all the cards as far as the yield plays out. So right now, I still think the bias is for a lower yield, but there's no good way to specifically say how low yet. We're just too early in the season. But obviously, if we're hot and dry for those 3 months in a row, it's going to be very tough, not only for corn but soybeans as well.
Yep.
And especially for those of us in the Western Corn Belt, I have to say that, because we have drier soil profiles here in the West.
Gotcha. Good stuff. Well, that was the only question I had. So short and sweet, and in the questions Q&A, and short and sweet in the presentation. So thanks, Todd, for all that. So I'll go ahead and wrap up and just say thanks to everybody for joining today. Just a quick reminder, we did record this session, so we'll have that rebroadcast up on DTN.com within the next 48 business hours. If you do have any additional questions, Todd has, as always, graciously put up his contact information. I'll give you a second to capture that. And that'll be it. So I'll say thank you one more time, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.